want to ask you another question. I like to throw out a lot of different questions. I'm originally from Georgia. If you don't know, well, now you know. Georgia Southern. I keep seeing that as being a checkmark game for Nebraska. I said this while we were playing. I think Georgia Southern's a way more talented team than Northwestern is, simply by location alone. They don't have guys that you've necessarily heard of and are big recruited guys, but that particular part of the country, to me, is easily, that's easily one of the that's a hotbed of talent in college football. And so there's definitely some guys that you've never heard of that are going to be, I would say from a talent standpoint, Georgia Southern's about on par with Nebraska. Now I'm going to go ahead and assume that they beat North Dakota. It's not like they're playing North Dakota State and Carson Wentz is coming back to play in college football again, but they're kind of jumping ahead a little bit to Southern. Mm-hmm. Do you think Southern, as much as Nebraska fans are just checking that game off the mark, and their history, by the way, they beat Florida. This was a decade ago, but they've beaten Florida. They've gone to overtime against Georgia. They've got some cats in the NFL. I mean, they're a talented school, and they get a guy in
Georgia Southern took Georgia to overtime.
Mark Rich era. Okay, it wasn't.
Mark Richt was a top 5 to 10 coach. They took Georgia to overtime.
Yes, look it up. I promise you, they took Georgia to overtime. They beat Florida. It was the Florida game was more memorable because the offensive linemen blocked each other, but they took Georgia to overtime. They've got guys like Matt Breida. They've got Younghoe Koo, who's the Falcons kicker. I mean, they have some talent at Georgia Southern, and they produce a lot of talent. They got Clay Helton. They got the number 2. Nebraska fans like to talk about Whipple and his offense that he runs. They brought in the number 2 guy who was the was it Western Kentucky? Yeah, Western Kentucky offensive coordinator last year, who coached Bailey Zapp. Remember, he was from a statistical standpoint last year, he was the best quarterback in the country. Even more so probably than Bryce Young, but that's kind of a hard comparison because Alabama versus Western Kentucky, you really wouldn't compare that. But when you look at things sort of more or less for what they are, he can coach. Like, they brought in a good offensive coordinator. They got Clay Helton, who reminds me a lot of Scott Frost. Think about Scott Frost in a non-Nebraska role. Clay Helton was at USC a few years back, last year, sorry, at his alma mater, and it just seemed like the stage was too big for him. He couldn't do anything. He was in a hotbed of talent, out there in California. He should have overperformed, and he just didn't. But you put Scott Frost at like a UCF, and they're just going to – it just is like they revel in that underdog role. My point with it being, I have a strong feeling Clay Helton at Georgia Southern, he's not expected to do a lot. He's already kind of comes into this and is, from a high-profile job to a small school. You give him enough talent that nobody's heard of. I don't know, man. I think that could be a lot of fans of Nebraska are saying it's a checkmark game. We're going to win that. No questions asked. Let's get to Oklahoma. It's a trap game, in my opinion, bro. What do you think?
I think you're onto something there. I can think of a number of times that Nebraska has played the likes of South Alabama under Scott Frost and some other teams, and they Northern Illinois and some games like that, and they didn't blow them out. They struggled to win those games. I am curious about this Georgia Southern game, so I'm looking at it right now. Absolutely, you're on it. 23-17. Georgia scored. What I found kind of interesting is Wikipedia said that Mark Richt did not coach that game. It would have been one of his last games. It would have been his second to last game, but he finished out the regular season before he got fired.
Yeah, what was that? 2014, 2015?
2015. They're showing that McClendon coached the game. But anyway, regardless, that was Mark Richt's last season at Georgia. Yeah, 23-17, scored a touchdown, Sony Michel in overtime against Georgia Southern. I would have just thought I would have remembered that game because of an SEC power almost losing. But anyway, that one slipped by me. I think you're onto something because it's always a role of us commentators, analysts slash fans to try to predict, okay, what is the psychological impact of this kind of deal? Is Nebraska going to be extra motivated, come out mad, punch somebody in the mouth? Or, this is a Big Ten loss. This team had aspirations of challenging in the Big Ten, and now they've lost to what was supposed to be one of the worst teams on their schedule. And they may be flat down. Now they've got time to recover because they're not playing next week, but they're coming back the next week. So, I think you're onto something because, there's not. It's difficult to judge the talent actually between those two teams, but you bring up some really good points. You're not going to find Georgia Southern in the recruiting rankings anywhere close to Nebraska, but you bring up some really good points about these types of programs that have they challenged those types of programs on a regular basis when they play them? No, but on a fairly regular basis, 2 out of 3 out of 10 times, let's say, will they throw a huge scare into somebody like that? And this Nebraska team is probably, I'm almost going to guarantee, not as good as that Georgia team in 2016.
Right. It's and you said it best. They kind of, you can make the same argument, right? To me, here's what I see happening, right? I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth for just a second. Someone said Georgia Southern is garbage. If Frost and Children of the Corn lose, goodbye Frost. Have a fun year. Go Illinois and LSU. Well, you know what I mean? Crazier things have happened. Coming into this year, in the comment sections of every video, I'm sure that both you and me have posted, it's always sort of been like, look, we're just trying to be realistic. We're trying to give you sort of, insightful sort of things that could happen. And it sort of seems to be Nebraska is going to go at least 8 and 4. That's the worst case. We can't lose to Northwestern. We're not going to lose to Northwestern. Well, we did. You know what I mean? This is the build up to this year crescendoed right here. It absolutely, crescendoed right here. And I mean, you think about it. It just makes sense. If you think about what they're going to do, they're going to beat North Dakota. They're not playing North Dakota State. If they were playing North Dakota State, I might have a different take on it, right? North Dakota State can shock a lot of, major college football programs, right? Like, I just think for me, if I'm looking at this and I'm really thinking about it, the Georgia Southern game to me, like they're going to beat North Dakota. I don't have any doubts in my mind. You know what I mean? I think where the season starts getting interesting is by how much, and I'll say this, I'm not predicting they lose to Georgia Southern, by the way. I think they beat them. But how much do you beat them by? Last year when they played Buffalo and they played, Fordham, they beat them by 40, 50 points. That game against Georgia Southern is going to set, to me, it sets the tempo for Oklahoma. But it's so weird to predict Nebraska because, Mark, I feel like you might be able to sort of, pontificate upon this a little bit more. Nebraska is a team that they play up or down to whoever they play. They can play Michigan or Ohio State and lose by less than a score, and then they can go out there and play, and you're like, oh my God, they're playing Illinois this week or Rutgers or whatever, and then they can go out and lose by a field goal, and you're like, what? It's a weird team to predict. I feel like if you have to predict them.